Today's talk is titled Electric Batteries, Environmental Saviors, to be delivered by Steve Nathanson. Steve is celebrating his 13th year as a resident of Cambria and is amazed at where all the time went. Steve and Marcia sold their New York home in late 2022 and spent most of 2023, when not in Cambria, on a gap year, celebrating 53 years of marriage. Being on the road, at home and abroad for much of the year helped drive Steve's interest in other cultural and environmental problems. Prior to living in Cambria, Steve was an educator with a consulting business and was an education professor for a total of over 40 years. He has published several articles on literacy education and teaching with brain-friendly classroom strategies. During Marcia and Steve's travels, Steve discovered a book by Siddhartha Kara, entitled Cobalt Red: How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives. It raised his consciousness about the mining industry, which is central to the production of electric car batteries, and alarmed his sense of social justice. His research continued as Steve dug deeper into numerous issues about electric vehicles, and he will share some of his findings with you today in the spirit of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
Good morning, everybody. It's an honor and it's a thrill to be here. I'll be leaving shortly, but it's been a great month, and UU is in our heart at all time. Anyway, on the bumper sticker of our Subaru is one of our favorite UU mantras: Unitarian Universalism, where all your answers are questioned. I've always considered this one reason why UUs are clever, curious, and well-informed. We know that truth is not easy, and answers to any problem are nuanced. So today, I want to pose some questions about an answer many people have put forth in order to eliminate fossil fuels and save our planet, which is in danger, of course. These are electric vehicles. But first, I'd like to beg your indulgence with a little activity. I'm going to ask you a question, and if you would please raise your hand, we can look around and see the response. Okay, I know it's not silenced, sorry, Nancy, but how many of you, by show of hands, have one of these devices with you? Okay, wow. How many of you rely on computers for your daily lives? I don't care if it's just correspondences or finances. Okay, good many of you. Okay. How many of you own electric vehicles? Okay, a couple of you. All right. Let me just say that it's pretty clear to me that we are in the computer age, and cell phones and microprocessors and electric vehicles are part of our daily lives, and that's something we can never escape from. But even if you don't drive a Tesla or another electric vehicle or a hybrid Prius, you still rely on battery technology, powerful rechargeable batteries, portable batteries to improve your lives. Oh, by the way, did you grab a TV remote lately, anyone? Okay. So now with more and more climate change challenges facing our overheated planet, I mean, just today, for example, the fires in Texas are out of control. The snow in Tahoe is just coming down in droves. So more and more climate changes are facing us, and we have the challenge to reduce greenhouse gases. So this has really moved the whole public attention to weather and freak storms and what's causing them. So the prospect of an electric future and saving our planet and eliminating a lot of our carbon dioxide emissions has become not only a moral imperative, but an existential one for our planet. So today I'd like to talk about some concerns that are created by the rechargeable batteries that run our cell phones, our EVs, and so many other technological wonders that we have. Based on recent data and scientific as well as journalistic research, I really found three critical questions. The first question, while there is no question at all that fossil fuels must go, are we trading one set of environmental problems for another? And that leads to the second question. What are the moral and environmental costs of a potential electric battery future? And with these two come a third question. What are the political and economic costs of an electric battery future? So being a UUer, I'd like to expand and discuss these questions, even if my answers are not always clear-cut or satisfying. In Charged, which is a book by James Morton Turner on the history of batteries, not just EVs, but all kinds of batteries, he clearly states that they are extremely important to the development of industrial power in the world. And he says, quote, batteries have played a little appreciated, but yet pivotal role in enabling systems of transportation, communication, and electrification that has reshaped our modern world. Public attention to batteries, however, is focused on two storylines. The first is a Promethean narrative focused on the next great battery breakthrough, like Prometheus who gave us fire. The second storyline sees batteries as the Achilles heel of our clean energy future. So before we tackle these important issues, let's just a little overview. I'm not a scientist or an engineer, but I'd just like to briefly summarize how batteries work before we get started in digging into these questions. Okay, again from Turner. What makes batteries unique is that they can store energy in chemical form, which can be converted into electricity instantaneously and on demand wherever and whenever needed. Batteries are always made up of one or more cells. Each cell contains an anode, a cathode, and an electrolyte. When connected by a circuit, batteries release electrons from the anode, or the negative pole, which then travel through the electrical circuit to the cathode, the positive or oxidizing electrode. And the anode and cathode undergo complementary chemical reactions, exchanging ions through the electrical circuit. As they move from anode to cathode, electrons do useful work for us, such as powering the light bulbs, a motor in our car, or a microprocessor. Although all batteries share this basic chemistry and are descendants of the original battery created by Alessandro Volta in the 1500s, a battery's properties depend upon the specific combination of materials making up the anode and the cathode and the electrolytes separating those two poles. It's these materials that determine a battery's capacity for charging and recharging, its power for different applications, and durability. So let's begin with lithium-ion batteries, which are most responsible for the modern technology in vehicles, computers, and cell phones. These use a variety of metallic components, such as graphite and lithium. As Turner states, in general, they are more powerful, more durable, and have a higher capacity. And they make these lithium-ion batteries, that's why they're the preferred technology for cars. They simply have enough power to have people accelerate on the expressways and the freeways. If you didn't have that power, your battery conked out, it would be a lot worse than saying, damn, my cell phone is dead. And that's an important thing. Even before Tesla's appeared, lithium batteries have become ubiquitous. I'll give you an example. Every day, I thank God that I switched from old-fashioned disposable lithium batteries to rechargeable hearing aids. These are much stronger, and I'm sure that the rechargeability of these hearing aids has enhanced my life. But as James Turner showed in his history of batteries, lithium-ion batteries were not the first type of battery to cause environmental problems. The lead-acid batteries that are found in gasoline and diesel automobiles and revolutionized transportation in the 20th century, and in effect assured the dominance of the Detroit auto industry because the battery processes and manufacture were controlled in the US. But even then, way back when we started using these batteries as opposed to cranking up Model Ts, the promise of batteries led to environmental problems. Lead, as we all know, is a highly toxic substance, and it's prone to pollute land and water. Batteries made with lead require extensive mining, but more importantly, when the batteries lose their usefulness or die, they have to be recycled. Otherwise, we have powerful pollution of lead. And just the same thing with lead paint. That's I just recently, as you heard, we closed on an apartment, and the real estate agent came to us after the whole sale was done, and we walked out happy and congratulating, and said, "You got to sign this. It's a lead disclosure form." Because lead paint is so closely monitored in New York State that in order to have this illegal transaction, we had to show proof that we were informed of the dangers of lead. So lithium-ion batteries have spawned new technologies, but they also, like lead batteries, have had negative consequences as well. So these negative consequences are part of what I call the devil's bargain. In other words, getting technology that's great, but at a price. So the common EV battery consists not only of graphite and lithium, but of metals, cobalt and nickel. So I'd like to begin this section talking about some of the problems associated with sourcing and obtaining these minerals for the manufacture of the batteries. And let's begin with cobalt. In an article in the Investing News Network, and this was in March 23, Melissa Pastilli wrote that cobalt is a material comprising about 60% of lithium-ion batteries currently produced. So 60% of those batteries consist of cobalt. Another author, Kevin Clemens, noted in Design News that cobalt increases the rate at which power is delivered, which facilitates discharge and recharge. Again, you need a battery that's going to be able to go from 0 to 60 quickly, and Teslas do, I'm told. So what does this mean? This means that demand for cobalt and smartphones has increased phenomenally from 1% in the 1990s to 56.54% in 2020s. So naturally, this has driven up prices and required manufacturers of batteries to seek out more and more sources of this mineral. But price escalations and demand situations are only part of the story. It's how they get the cobalt out of the ground that is really the political and the moral crux of the issue. More than half of our entire world's cobalt supply comes from the one place in Africa that is loaded with all kinds of mineral wealth. I'm talking about Katanga province, about a 400 square kilometer province in the southern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which was formerly known years ago as the Belgian Congo. Now, going back in history, the history of the Belgian Congo is a history of colonial exploitation of its mineral wealth. Europeans, especially Belgian, found how the wealth of this place would line their pockets, okay? Now, novelist Joseph Conrad wrote Heart of Darkness after he visited the Belgian Congo in the 19th century. And he wrote, and I quote from his novel, Heart of Darkness, "This is the vilest scramble for loot ever disfiguring the history of human conscience." Here is a man who is an expat Englishman who was appalled by the colonial exploitation of this country. So over 100 years later, and we talked about this and I mentioned it in my reading, Siddharth Kara, who was an investigative reporter, did a very dangerous journey to the to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC. He visited from November 21 through early 22. And of course, he was not given a royal welcome. Many times soldiers hassled him. He has had to beg and scream to get passage into the mining areas. And he said, and this is the interesting thing, that all the cobalt sourced from the DRC, doesn't matter where it is manufactured, is tainted by various degrees of abuse, including slavery, child labor, forced labor, debt bondage of workers, human trafficking, terribly hazardous and toxic working conditions, pathetic wages for the miners, injury and death, and incalculable environmental harm to the countryside. But the supply chain for cobalt, he said, would not exist if it wasn't for this substantial demand that's escalated in the 2020s. So the companies Kara referred to include Chinese companies such as Huayu Cobalt and BYD, which in 2021 produced 75% of the world's refined cobalt. Now that cobalt was used primarily to manufacture EVs. Cobalt itself is a byproduct of copper mining, and in the DRC, cobalt is obtained by a deadly combination of so-called artisanal miners, which are basically freelance people, as well as a few commercial open pit mines run by the mining companies, specifically built and run by the Chinese. Artisanal mining, as Kara documents, relies on individual laborers, men, women, and increasingly children, who climb into the pits to fill sacks with haragenite, which is a soil that contains chunks of copper and pieces of cobalt, which they call raisins. Artisanal miners have no choice but to sell their sacks of ore for about $1 per sack to independent negociants, who in turn transport this and deliver it to refineries built and owned by the Chinese. Negociants and refiners make extensive profit because they just up the price at each step in the supply chain. But the artisans who struggle to mine the cobalt copper ore eke out a living for pennies. Kara noted that there is no such thing as a clean supply chain of cobalt. The supply chain is always tainted when it comes from the DRC, and that's where most of the ore is coming from. So I'm just going to read one more little tidbit from this book, just to give you a flavor, and then we'll move on, okay? I dropped a stone and followed Philippe. Philippe is the guide who risked his life to go with him and show Kara the different mining situations. Most of the artisanal miners cast suspicious glances as I walked by. A teenage mother stopped digging for a moment and leaned against her shovel under the murky daylight. She gazed at me as if I was an invader. Dust swallowed the meager infant strapped to her back. Philippe asked if she would be open to speaking with us. "Who will fill this ore sack while I talk to you?" she responded eagerly. We walked further through the mine and found a group of 6 males caked in dirt and mud, ages 8 to 35. The oldest member of the group was the head of the family named Faustin. He explained that his brother, sister-in-law, brother-in-law, wife, cousin, and 3 of his children worked in a group. By the way, kids don't go to school there because they have to be part of this mining operation. Each day they filled large raffia sacks filled with mud, dirt, and haragenite stones, which they dug out of a pit. They broke down the stones into pebbles so they could fit more in each sack. Once the sacks were full, they carried them to nearby pools of water to sift out the contents through a metal sieve. Then the negotiants came to the site and paid 5,000 Congolese francs per sack, which was about $2.80 per sack. The payment implied an income that was roughly $1.05 US per team member per day, which is why this was a family affair. Propaganda from large corporations and the Congolese government tends to cover up the abuse. But Kara said that his entire visit to the DRC, looking at this mining operation, was an example of how, and I quote him directly, this is not my opinion, this is his, slave trading has been extended to the 21st century. In 2018, McKinsey and Company, an investment strategy and mining consulting firm, issued a report called A Tale of Two Commodities. The report noted that the cobalt supply in the world is highly fragmented, but it's highly monopolistic in structure. Now, we already have mentioned that DRC having the lion's share of the cobalt riches in the planet. Here are the other companies that are major players. Indonesia, which is in second place, and that's primarily due to Chinese investment and their infrastructure. And the third player is Russia. So given the political situation of the Ukraine-Russian war and the US's unstable relationships with China and, sad to say, increasingly Indonesia, it's not certain that domestic EV production can or will be increased with stable supply of cobalt. McKinsey noted that the other players are just accounting for about 13% of the global cobalt supply, which is meager. These are countries like Australia and Canada, which are our friends, but just don't have enough to support the EV industry. And another reason that this is so severe is that the Chinese build mines and refineries in places where there are weak environmental laws and even weaker enforcement. I mean, they should have labor inspectors looking at what's going on. They do not. They simply don't care. It's subsistence. It's desperate. But moving on, in the history of batteries, Turner pointed out that when the US was able to acquire raw materials and metals, we always dominated the battery industry. We know, for example, we have Eveready batteries, we have Duracell, we know the Eveready Bunny, we know the Duracell Copper Top. But because batteries like this require massive amounts of cobalt, the US is clearly at a disadvantage. Now let's consider another important metal, lithium. I read recently there was a fatal fire in an apartment building in New York City, and that's because a lithium battery that was in an electrified bicycle burst into flames. Lithium is used for many good things. It was a psychiatric mainstay as a treatment for depression. The metal is an exquisite conductor of electricity. It can be charged and recharged readily, and my ears will tell you that. But we contain supplies of lithium. We don't have to go to a place like the Congo to get this, but they're primarily in hard rock mines in North Carolina and salt brines in Nevada. And recently they found that the Salton Sea contains a rich amount of lithium. A man named Ed Conway, who wrote a book about all these strategically important metals in history, called lithium the 21st century white gold. So beginning in the 1990s, when demand for lithium increased, it became sourced from the so-called lithium triangle in South America, the countries of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. During the 70s, when Pinochet, the dictator, was in power, mining companies became interested in the Atacama Desert, which is a long string bean-shaped desert between the coastal mountains of Chile and the Andes. A Chilean company, SQM, was given a monopoly to pump out all of the brines from this desert-like place. The extraction of lithium requires much less energy than obtaining it from busting up hard rock. But there's a major downside to lithium mining from sand and former water pools. And this is pollution, contamination of potable water supplies, and also displacing the indigenous people who live in these places. This is a key thing. So a recent document documentary, which we're going to show you, just a trailer, shows the pollution and displacement of indigenous lands. And during the clip, you'll see a greenish pool. That's a drying pool where that was formerly a pond of potable water. Which is there's tremendous pollution from this mining because they have to pump out these salt brines with water and bring it to the surface and let the sun dry it. So what happens is they have a situation where waste products are in the sand, and that's left behind after they scoop up the lithium. But let's move on. Let's talk about another serious, important metal in batteries, which is nickel. Nickel is needed to stabilize the battery itself, to prevent the kinds of fires that occurred in that apartment building. Now, significant supplies of nickel come from countries that are either politically unstable, with weak economies, or they come from autocratic oligarchies. Let me mention three of them. Indonesia, a big source of nickel, Philippines, and Russia. In another report on the status of nickel in lithium-ion batteries, Mulder pointed out, Russia's war with Ukraine was solely responsible for spiking of nickel prices in 2022. Melissa Pistilli also adds that nickel mining involves serious environmental concerns, including air and water pollution, habitat destruction, community displacement, wildlife migration pattern disturbances, greenhouse gas emissions. Is that enough of a problem? Even if friendly nations with abundant nickel resources, and there are two, Australia and Canada, were able to ramp up our supply of nickel, it's still perilous because it's the most polluting mining source on Earth. And it leaves a trail of devastation. And I haven't even talked about one other important part of a battery, electric batteries, which is graphite. The virtual monopoly for graphite is China. But here's how things have played out more recently. I don't know if it's a reaction to environmental concerns, international complaints about the exploitation of miners in the Congo, but China has begun manufacturing lithium iron phosphate batteries, or LFP batteries, which don't use some of those toxic materials such as cobalt and nickel. However, their range, their durability, and their efficacy have been called into question. Tesla has been recently adopted these type of LFP batteries in their newest Model Y cars. However, in the 22, we had the Inflation Reduction Act, and that mandated a surcharge for any batteries manufactured in places other than the US. And we know, for example, that US auto electric battery process and is really not working as smoothly as they would like to. For example, GM has discontinued its electric Volt automobile, and the Rivian has also had some problems with their trucks, and Ford has discontinued this 150 electric truck. They just simply have too many reliability problems. But Toyota, and this is something grateful to Ted about him, he keyed me into that, is the king of hybrids. We know we had a Prius that was a great car, and we announced that now Toyota is working on a new battery that doesn't use any of these things. But the problem with that is it's still in development, and with things still in development, they haven't been tested and approved, and there is no real proof that they're going to work until many years from now. Now, here's another issue associated with EVs, electronic charging networks. Yes, the Inflation Reduction Act mandated that we build in charging infrastructures throughout the country. because market researchers have found that what's stopping people the most, not the price of these cars, but the phobia about range. I mean, if they can only go 90 miles, that's not going to cut it for me for a trip to Trader Joe's and back in California. So market researchers are really have been concerned about that. But recently, New York and several other states, I think Connecticut as well, have taken those funds and begun to set up charging networks. California has not, strangely enough, and some states where fossil fuels dominate, they're not even ready to begin charging networks. And in cold climates where electric battery efficiency and power declines rapidly, and charging takes much longer in a cold climate such as, think, Minnesota, they haven't really set up effective charging networks. So obviously, there's much to be done. So I don't mean to depress you, but I just mean to talk about that this is a complex problem. And this is always the case when we try to do something good and save the planet, but we have unintended negative consequences. Mother Nature doesn't like being fooled and doesn't like being tampered with. For example, we heard that cow's milk was creating a methane problem. So we thought, let's switch to almond milk. Then we found out that almond milk uses untold amounts of water from the aquifers. One nut takes supposedly a gallon of water, my engineering friend said. So oat milk, anyone? I hope so. Similarly, in Australia, when in the late 1800s, they had a serious problem with predators, insects and little rodents and all kinds of critters. So what did they do? They introduced the rabbit to Australia. And we know how that worked out. So I'd like to conclude now, and I thank you for your attention and hope I made you think about some of these things. James Turner put it this way: until we allocate resources in government-funded projects for safe and reliable green energy systems, and until we develop reliable batteries to run our vehicles that don't contain these toxic metals sourced from dubious countries, we may have to continue to live with our devil's bargain of fossil fuels or hybrids. I'm not here to judge EVs or tell you not to buy them. I think they're a great idea. But as the saying goes, be aware or be square. That's the UU way. Thank you.